the Most High God and Christianity is simply there at the beginning. It just says there was the one, in the Silmarillion. And of course, the Bible very famously begins with, in the beginning, God. Not in the beginning, God came from somewhere. In the beginning, God, was licked out of the ice or emerged. No. It just says God, and it's telling you what he was doing. In the Silmarillion, there is one who is the Most High, who's uncreated, and then he creates the other gods. This is exactly a Christian model. So there's no quibbling about this one. There's no remix going on here. Tolkien was very, very precise in lining up his theogony with the Bible in this regard.
Well, hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Barrel Age Faith. Today I have Father Andrew Damick. It's great to have you on the show. I've been following your work for a very long time, and it's great to have you finally on.
Finally, it's good to be here. I was sitting here waiting to get that invitation in the mail, and just feeling like the only kid who didn't get invited to the birthday party here. So
it's funny. It's like you were like on like a big top of my list, but I was explaining to you before the podcast. I'm kind of a weird guy. It's true. I don't actually chase people.
It's only chasing if you send 5 emails and they don't respond.
But here we are. It's worked out. It's great to have you on the show, and we're talking about this. Again, if I was a better podcaster, I would have had you on the Annunciation Day, right? March 25th.
Right. Tolkien Reading Day. What's the matter with you? That's crazy.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm a failing podcast. For those that don't know anything about Lord of the Rings, but maybe they know a little bit about the Orthodox faith, why is March 25th an important day, both for Lord of the Rings fans and also Orthodox Christians?
Yes. So it is the Annunciation to the Theotokos, that great feast of the church. And there is a very old tradition that great people are born or conceived and then die on the same date in the year. This is called integral age, which of course Tolkien would have been aware of. And the Annunciation is the moment when God becomes man. And so when Tolkien was setting up the amazingly detailed chronology of his work, he arranged that the Ring of Power, this huge symbol and enactor of evil in his legendarium, would be indeed destroyed on the 25th of March. It becomes also Gondorian New Year. And then eventually becomes Tolkien Reading Day by fans, the last few decades, whatever. But a lot of them don't realize that it's actually based on the church calendar. Just as, of course, the day that they set out from Rivendell to take the ring south is December 25th. So there's a connection. Tolkien is not dumb, and none of this is random. And this is a man who literally was revising his manuscript over and over again to make sure that the phases of the moon matched what he wrote in his text. So he actually had this map of where his characters were, what the phases of the moon would have been, what date it is, all this kind of stuff. So it's all very carefully planned. This obsessive man gave us some really beautiful stuff when you look closely at it. So happy day after,
Right.
Recording on the 26th of March here. Happy day after Tolkien Reading Day. Happy leave taking of the Annunciation to the Theotokos.
Yes, it's whenever I'm reading him, I always have to be careful. Am I pushing this too far to see these connections? But at the same time, when you do read him and then you understand the kind of mind he had and how obsessive he was, it's like, well, maybe this wasn't too far, these connections that he has.
Not always, but maybe.
Exactly. There's quite the balance in doing that,
Yeah.
right? So today we're talking about Father Andrew's work, actually. I mean, on the Divine Council and Tolkien and the scary word gods. So you wrote am I correct? You wrote your thesis, master's work on this kind of topic?
That's right. So, I mean, I sent a copy of my thesis to someone, and basically they said, "Oh, so this is Lord of Spirits meets Lord of the Rings." I'm like, yes, that is correct. That is what this thesis is. This is, of course, feeds. There's a certain person and who claims that it's all just one podcast, and this thesis does nothing to disabuse anyone of that particular notion.
Right. So I don't know if you want to begin with like talking about what is the Divine Council, and then we'll talk about everything Tolkien. But when we talk about that word Divine Council, is this just like, what does this word mean? I mean, a lot of people have heard it in the Protestant world from maybe someone like a Michael Heiser, of course.
Yeah.
But it definitely has a robust meaning. I mean, we can use other words like the Heavenly Council or the High Mountain, Most High God of the gods. What do you mean by the Divine Council?
So the phrase is generally a scholarly one, but it actually appears in the scriptures. So at the beginning of Psalm 82, it says that God stood up and it gets translated various ways. council of the gods, the divine council. Sometimes it is translated exactly that way. But this is a phrase, especially in the scholarly usage, that is an attempt to grapple with the fact that the Bible talks about gods in the plural. Which is surprising to a lot of people, because many people have been given the idea that Christianity is a monotheistic religion, meaning that only one God even exists, right? And that the rest are just fairy tales, that the gods worshipped by paganism are just figments of their imagination, that kind of stuff. But if you actually look at the way that the Bible uses this word gods, and this is quite literally the word it is. I've had people tell me, no, you shouldn't translate it that way. But it's like, well, it's in Hebrew, it's Elohim, and Greek, it's Thei. Like it simply is the word gods. Like there's kind of no way around that. And they say you shouldn't translate it that way because we don't believe in other gods. But it's pretty clear in terms of agreeing that they exist, the Bible believes in other gods. They do exist. So if you were to search everywhere in the Bible that you see that word gods in plural, it's talking about, in any particular case, it's talking about one of three possibilities. One is it could be talking about the angels. That is for sure, because, for instance, God is called God of gods. And that's not referring to the demons. We wouldn't call him the God of demons. That would be not a nice thing to call him. So it can be talking about angels. It can also be talking about the spiritual beings worshipped by pagans as well. So that could be fallen angels. There's some other explanations as to where those spirits are from. We don't need to get into that unless you really, really want to. But so it could also be talking about these fallen spirits that are worshipped by the pagans. And then also the word in a couple of places is used to refer to dead humans. So the very most famous indication of that is where Saul goes and has a medium, through the use of necromancy, summon up the spirit of the prophet Samuel. And the medium, she says that she sees gods coming up out of the earth. And no one says, no, don't use that word for this, and certainly even if you go outside the Bible and look at other ancient texts, you can see all of those usages as well. And indeed, a number of other translations of the Old Testament make reference to gods in this way. For instance, the giants in Genesis chapter 6 are referred to in certain Old Greek Old Testaments as sons of the gods. That is the way that phrase gets translated in certain of the translations, not the text that is often called the Septuagint, but in other ones as well. So I mean, this is out there, and so what do you do with that? Generally speaking, a lot of modern Christians don't know what to do with that, or they try to kind of explain it away, but none of the explanations I've read really make sense of all the data, even if you're just looking at only the scriptures, right? So look at only the scriptures, and the image that you get is not there's one God that exists and then a bunch of other ones that are just fairy tales. No, it's that there is one God who is uncreated, who is the creator, who created all things, who is over all things, who is almighty, who is omnipresent, which already, by the way, this list of descriptions applies to 0 pagan gods. And that's what pagans say about their own gods. They don't say that, they regard all their gods as kind of limited compared to what I just said. There's one God, and then there are other beings that are called gods. And there are obedient gods, angels. There are disobedient gods, these fallen spirits. And so then to acknowledge that these other beings are gods is not to say that they should be worshipped.
Right.
It is not to say that they are the creator or anything like that. No one used that word that way. And I think probably the best way, if people kind of want to get into this and understand, like, why is this word God used to refer to God, but also gods, is that really the word as it's used in most ancient texts means rulers. So there's one who is truly the ruler over all. And indeed, some translations of the creed, when they're translating Pantocrator, they translate it as ruler over all. It usually gets translated as almighty. But there's one who is the ruler over all, and then there are these other rulers. And so they are either kind of sub-rulers as part of God's government, his ministers, so to speak, his governmental ministers, or they are fallen spirits presenting themselves to mankind as the rulers, usurping rule over mankind. And the only rule that they have is because mankind gives it to them, because they choose to worship them, because they choose to obey them. They don't have any inherent power to make them do that. And so what that means is that if you understand that that's the picture that the Bible gives, and then you compare that against the pagan stories and their mythology, what you get in the Bible is actually a correction of what's going on in the pagan stories. And it's essentially to say, look, these spiritual beings are presenting themselves as truly powerful and as able to kind of, follow through on all the promises they make about rain and fertility and victory in warfare and this kind of stuff. But actually, they're losers. And there's so many references in the Psalms, for instance, basically calling them losers, and they're completely incapable of following through on their promises. This is all over the Old Testament, especially. But then what you get is that one of the big arcs of the Bible is really about the people of God being called away from idolatry. Don't worship other gods, and especially idolatry is worshiping through cultic images, right? So that you have a statue that is considered to be the body of your god, and you burn sacrifices in front of it and all this kind of stuff. And this is everywhere in the Old Testament. It's in the New Testament as well, because there's so many people converting from idolatry to Christianity in the New Testament, and so it keeps coming up over and over again. And so we don't need to be afraid of this word gods. We don't need to be afraid of the phrase divine counsel, because there is a perfectly good explanation for this, and it's simply embedded in the scripture. And then once you see that is the case, right, then you can understand where there's moments where it seems that God is having a discussion with other beings and making decisions, right? So a great example of this, for instance, is in the book of Isaiah, in Isaiah's prophecy, where Isaiah is brought up into the divine council temporarily. And God says, "Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?" And Isaiah says, "Here am I, send me." Well, the us is, it's not God, it's not the Father speaking to the Son and the Holy Spirit. That would be a little weird in some ways, not unthinkable. I mean, certainly the Son speaks to the Father in the New Testament, but that's not what's going on. It's really because the question would make no sense if it's God sort of addressing himself. But it's within this divine counsel, and even though it's not explicit in Exodus, certainly the New Testament talks about Moses on Sinai being given the Torah through the means of angels. This is 3 places in the New Testament. God is often said in various places to appear with his heavenly hosts. God is in this council of the gods. I mean, this is simply the way it is. And by no means they compete with him. The fact that they exist does not mean that we should be tempted to worship them.
Right.
It just means that these are other lesser spiritual beings that God has created. And when you look at that model that the Bible gives, and then you compare that to the pagan models, there's a lot in common, but there's also some really, really significant differences. So as I said, the Bible is correcting what you see in the pagan models. So that's kind of the short version of how to describe the divine counsel. It shouldn't be anything scary. It's just the fact that we have these great spiritual beings who are still lesser spiritual beings, lesser than God himself, that are called gods because they are rulers in some capacity. Whether for real, God has assigned them, tasks to take care of the nations or various elements of creation, or because they're usurpers and presenting themselves as gods to mankind.
Right. This is a good point to make. So growing up, I would think of like there's God, the Most High God, and then way below that, we just have like mailmen who are just delivering messages. Right.
I mean, even the phrase you use, Most High God,
Yeah.
makes no sense if he's the only God that exists.
Hmm. That's true. That's true. Yeah. So, you think of angels, of course, the word means messenger, and you think of them as like mailmen delivering some kind of message, and that's like the only thing they do. But when you
Yeah.
dive into scripture, and I remember doing this as a Protestant, biblical theology, you dive into the book of Daniel, and that's a wild, wild book. It's kind of like jumping into the book of Revelation or Apocalypse. It's like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
wow, there are angels who are fighting each other. They're overseeing cities, and they're connected to kings, and they're prohibiting travel from
Yeah.
one
There's some
place
that are
to another.
called watchers. And like there's one point where Daniel says this has been done or will be done by according to the decree of the watchers. So they're issuing decrees on behalf of God that are going to be carried out in accordance with this prophet's sayings.
It's good. It's an interesting conversation because when people struggle with maybe the doctrine of the communion of saints, this is really kind of this doctrine of, I don't know, learning about who the angels are and not just having this bare minimal sort of perspective on them. They're not just mailmen. There's a lot going on
No.
with their
They're
activity.
they're doing so they do deliver messages, but they also protect us from evil. They carry out the will of God. They, they will do battle with other spiritual powers, all this kind of stuff. Um, and even in the Psalms, David talks to that. David calls upon them, especially he calls upon them to be praising God and worshiping him, and so forth. Um, but yeah, you have this full orbed image of what it is that angels do. Um, and then what we say about human saints, and I like to say the angels are the original saints because it depends on the translation, but what you might see in the Old Testament is the word saints used or holy ones. People need to understand that these are the same word.
Right.
Just in most languages, it's just simply one word. But in English, we have this kind of plenitude of different terms. We tend to use saint to refer to holy humans, and holy ones, it gets translated. It's funny, I've seen Bibles where it's saint in the New Testament, holy ones in the Old Testament refer to angels, but really it's saints and saints, or it's holy ones and holy ones. And so the way that Orthodox Christians talk about saints is simply that they have become, as Jesus says in Luke chapter 20, equal to the angels. That they do all the same stuff, that they carry out the same tasks. They don't become angels by nature, but they become like the angels. They function the same way that the angels do. And so everything that we say about angels in the Old Testament, a lot of that gets applied to holy humans in the New Testament, including even titles like sons of God. Like, so sons of God is an angel reference in the Old Testament. I know there's some quibble about whether it really means that in Genesis 6. Okay, we can set that aside. There's multiple other places the phrase is used in the Old Testament. It's clearly talking about angels. And Jesus, like I said, in Luke 20, verse 36, he says, the sons of the resurrection become sons of God and equal to the angels. That's pretty straightforward. And I think people often skip that part because they're so interested in the beginning of that verse, which is talking about whether there's marriage in heaven, because this is when the Sadducees come to him and they give them this puzzle, right? Because they don't believe in the resurrection. But then Jesus comes with that banger at the end, and sons of God equal to the angels. I don't know what you do with that, except, I don't know, become Orthodox. Seems like a good solution to me.
Right, right. Yeah. I mean, so oftentimes I think in my background, we're just trying to make these strong distinctions between, well, this is Jesus, the Son of God. Therefore, we need to really, play down any kind of other role. But, someone like J.R.R. Tolkien didn't do that. He seems to sort of carry this biblical imagery into Middle Earth, into Lord of the Rings.
Yep.
So what's the transition here? We've got the divine counsel in scripture that's very clear. How does it begin sort of playing a role in this, very created world with the father of modern fantasy? Where does it show up there?
Yeah. So the reason that I wrote my MA thesis, not just to get the MA, but because there's this kind of debate that goes on in Tolkien scholarship, and it seems endless. And the debate is the Middle Earth legendarium pagan or Christian or something else? And the people who say that it's pagan, and they might like that, or they might criticize that. So there's people who are not Christians or anti-Christian who love the idea of the Middle Earth legendarium being pagan. But then there's also certain Christians, often kind of on the more fundamentalist Protestant side, who hate the idea that it's pagan and say, yes, it is pagan, and so you shouldn't read that, it's terrible for you, and so forth. So there's a whole group of people that say it's pagan. And the thing that they will usually point at is say, well, look, maybe not so much in the Lord of the Rings, although yes, in the Lord of the Rings, but definitely in the Silmarillion, there are gods. There are multiple gods hanging out in that book, kind of running things, all that, right? So yes, exactly. And so clearly this must be pagan. And as everybody knows, in Christianity, there's just one God. So if you introduce other gods, then that is pagan, or at least semi-pagan, that kind of thing. And given what we just said about the divine counsel, you can kind of see what I thought about this. But on the other hand, you have people who say, no, they're not gods. Tolkien uses that word gods to refer to them, but they're not gods. They're just angels. You shouldn't really even call them gods. They're only nominally gods. You can see that sometimes it's just nominally gods. They're just angels. They act just like angels. And the idea that this is pagan is kind of nonsense. It just sort of looks that way. And it's funny. I mean, you can find, especially on the yes, this is pagan side, there's memes. There's internet memes dedicated to this. And some will even say, this is where Tolkien's heart really was. Tolkien was really a pagan. He was a Christian because everyone around him expected him to be, right? Like this was just, social pressure, basically forcing him to be Christian, which is one of the most ignorant things I've ever heard. I mean, I've heard some ignorant things. Multiple reasons. One is this man went to, especially in his later years, this man went to church every day. Which, if he was some kind of crypto pagan, like social pressure was not making him go to church every day. Most people did not go to church every day. But the other thing is, he was in an Anglican society and he was Roman Catholic, and he experienced not strong, but he experienced marginalization because of his Roman Catholicism, but more importantly, his mother experienced massive marginalization because of her Roman Catholicism, and he regarded her as a kind of martyr for her faith, because she suffered from her family who rejected her, and she lived in poverty as a result of that. So this was deep down in his soul. This was a man who was staunchly Roman Catholic because he meant it. He absolutely meant it. He did not, if he was going to pick the easy way, he would have been a nominal Anglican who went to church once a month, maybe. That was pretty normal in his time. But no, he was Roman Catholic. For the vast majority of his life. He converted with his mother when he was quite young, and when she converted herself. So, so this idea that Tolkien was kind of secretly pagan. I mean, there's a lot of. I think this is good to explore for a minute, because not just do we have the well-known elements of, that he went to church all the time, but also, what does it really mean to be a pagan? Is it that you like Norse literature super well, that you think Odin is cool? What does that really mean? A real pagan is someone who makes sacrifices to these gods. Like, it's not just what you think or feel. We're talking religious behavior.
Right.
Okay. And I think that's one of the problems is there's this idea that religion is like politics. It's a set of opinions you have. But it's not. Religion is what you do with yourself, right? Certainly politics implies action too, but most people's politics is just, stuff they post on Twitter and Facebook, or they vote once in a while. But religion is action. There's religious actions of faithfulness. And Tolkien was a faithful Roman Catholic, especially at the end of there was a period of his life where he said that he kind of neglected his religion a lot. He says this in one of his letters. And I point that out to people sometimes, because they say, oh, his whole life. Actually, not his whole life. There was a point when he was young where, in his 20s, where he said that he neglected to practice his religion, is what he said. So it's there in his letters. But certainly in the later part of his life, this man was quite the churchgoer, going to mass every single day. But there is zero indication that the man was ever involved in pagan worship. If that's where his heart really was, then there should be some kind of evidence, but there's no evidence. There's no evidence.
No. And I mean, he was raised by a Catholic priest in a sense, like his spiritual father, and he's
kind
of adopted. And he doesn't speak of this in negative terms. I mean, he speaks of it in glowing terms when you read his letters.
Absolutely. I mean, and the other thing people say, okay, there's a point, for instance, in one of his letters where he describes the Lord of the Rings. He doesn't say the Legendarium in general, but he says the Lord of the Rings is a fundamentally religious and Catholic work. And sometimes people on the kind of Christian apologetics side of this question, because people use Tolkien for apologetics one way or another, which I think is a bad idea. But sometimes people on this kind of Christian apologetics side will say, look, see, Tolkien said it's fundamentally religious and Catholic work, end of story, period. There's a problem with that, though. I mean, we need to be honest. Like that appeals to me because I like easy answers. But the thing is that Tolkien throughout his life said various things about his works, and sometimes they're not consistent with each other. Tolkien, one of the great things about Tolkien is that we probably know more about this man's creative process than we do maybe about any other writer who's ever lived. Possibly.
Mm-hmm.
If not, he's like top 3. But I think he's number 1. So that's great. But the other problem is that we know more about Tolkien's creative process than we do about almost anyone else. And so as a result, then any little thing that he said at one point or along the line, people point to it as though it's some kind of dogmatic comment. And that, is he always right about his own work? Sometimes he's not. Sometimes he says stuff that if you dig deep, like actually he was kind of talking off the cuff, or maybe saying something in a letter that he thought the person wanted to hear, or whatever it might be. I mean, if someone recorded everything that you ever said, Cassian, would it all be consistent? Would you be right about all of it? Like, there's no way. We don't have everything he ever said, but boy, do we have a lot of what this man said.
Yeah, I may have to do a retractions.
Yeah, probably. I mean, all of us would have to do a lot of retractions. I mean, so the reason why, just for people who maybe are not, not Tolkien scholars, just to give you some sample of what I mean by that is, not only do we have his letters, which, by the way, there's an expanded version of his letters that came out just a couple years ago, which I super recommend. So if you want more of that kind of thing, there's way more of that kind of thing. And we have him commenting everywhere in there. But then also his son, Christopher, after his father died, went through all of his papers, all of his archives, I mean, which was a huge amount of stuff, and began to publish kind of almost every serviceable draft of every part of everything that he'd ever written. And so now it seems like, okay, there's no possible way they can come up with something more to publish. And then somehow every year or two, we get another book of stuff that has not been published before. But it's volumes and volumes and volumes of various drafts and sets of development of his works, all of the works, not just, of course, the Middle Earth stuff, but other stuff that he wrote as well. Things that were buried in archives for a long time, which I'm really glad that they've dug this stuff out, because, I mean, this man is a super, super genius. And I'm happy to read anything from him, if it's his grocery list, which, I'm sure there'll be a collection of grocery lists that'll be published sometime soon.
I'm sure it was thoughtful. He was probably trying to make some kind of bread at home.
Yeah. And he was a big doodler too, by the way. This man drew pictures all the time in his notes. And so as a result, you get not only the drafts, but then, because most of them are handwritten drafts. But then you get little comments that he would write in the marginalia. I mean, it's just amazing. Like I said, we know more about this one man's creative process than just about anybody in history, because we don't have just the works that he published. We have many versions before it ever got to publication, what he thought about it, how he was changing it, abortive attempts to revise stuff, even that had been published. Like he was attempting to do another version of The Hobbit, like in sort of this higher kind of tone or whatever. And it was so bad. Everyone said, please just stop, leave it alone, Yeah. So I think that, it's clear that Tolkien is a very faithful Roman Catholic. And what's also clear is that Tolkien knows the scriptures super well. And Tolkien is very steeped in the medieval tradition of interpreting them, which doesn't just mean, like Roman Catholic stuff from the Middle Ages. The Catholic material of the Middle Ages is based on the inheritance of the undivided church of the first millennium. So
right.
It's not like
it's patristic. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's patristic. Absolutely. So if you read medieval Catholic texts, especially the earlier ones, there's very little in them to disagree with as an Orthodox Christian. Very, very little. And often they're preserving various kinds of traditions, and especially saints' lives, that are lost in the East. So he was aware of all that stuff. He read most of those things in their original languages. And so in many ways, the kind of Catholic that Tolkien was not a modern Catholic. He was kind of a medieval Catholic living a modern life, in a lot of ways. I'm generalizing, but what that meant, though, is that his familiarity with even, like, say, apocalyptic sources and Second Temple Jewish sources, he may not have read the texts themselves, because a lot of that stuff was not published or published in English in his time, although a lot of those languages he could certainly read. But he knew it through the medieval texts that he was very, very familiar with.
Well, I think even some people, it's like you throw out the word Dante out there and people's imaginations go wild. But when you read someone like Dante and then you read some like Byzantine texts from the 9th century, It's like, yeah, there might be some differences, but there are also some like similarities, right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so when you dive into the afterlife, or you can dive into a number of different topics, it's good to be familiar with the Orthodox Byzantine world in
Right.
the 10th century.
And what's
So
fascinating to me is I think so there's mountains of Tolkien scholarship out there, and there are slightly smaller mountains of religious Tolkien scholarship out there. There is a molehill of Orthodox Tolkien scholarship out there. And I've tried to, build the molehill up a little bit, but one of the things I think that Orthodox Christians can supply that Catholic writers, or even more historically formed Protestant writers don't tend to, is our knowledge of patristic, apocalyptic, Second Temple Jewish texts that is all embedded in our tradition. And so sometimes we see things in Tolkien that other people miss, even if it's theoretically in their history, but it's just been buried under the modern versions of their religion.
right.
Whereas so in some ways Tolkien is closer to I'm not going to say he was crypto orthodox. I've never been able to find any reference to him, a reference he made to knowing anything about the Orthodox Church. He certainly would have known about it as an educated man of his age. He probably would have called it, just like most Englishmen at the time, he would have called it the Greek Church, right? And certainly his friend C.S. Lewis went to at least one Orthodox service. We know that. So there's no way Tolkien wasn't aware of
Right.
the Orthodox Church. But I've never seen any reference to him talking about it. So if he had an opinion about it, we don't know what it
Sure.
was.
Apparently, Lewis even presented a paper on icons to the Anglican Orthodox Society at Oxford, which is
Interesting.
lost. We don't have that paper. It'd be fun
That's
to read.
too bad. That would have been interesting to read.
It'd be an interesting read.
But, and also I'll just say, because some people say, well, it's an Orthodox Christian, you can't claim Tolkien as Orthodox. I'm not claiming Tolkien as Orthodox. I know full well, I've read all of his letters. He says explicitly that he believes in the papal claims. I mean, this man believed in the papacy. Right. So that's very clear. Now, he's not thinking about Orthodoxy when he says that. He's almost certainly thinking about Anglicans when he says that. But he definitely was. He was a Roman Catholic. Like, there's just no way around it. But his knowledge of early medieval Catholicism puts him closer to Orthodoxy, frankly, than most modern Catholics. Even some of the people that are in kind of the Recensement style of Catholics.
Hey guys, I just want to share a few books with you that have left a big impact on my life. One of them is Bearing God, the Life and Works of St. Ignatius of Antioch, the God Bearer by Father Andrew Stephen Damick. Many people have a paradigm shift when they begin reading the letters of St. Ignatius of Antioch. Well, this little book by Father Andrew is so helpful in navigating his letters and summarizing the key themes. So I think you'll enjoy this book. Another book that's very popular that left a big impact on my life is The Religion of the Apostles by Father Stephen DeYoung. This is quickly becoming a classic. It's helped people sort of understand how the Old Testament and New Testament have a continuity with the early church, the church fathers. I've also had Father Joseph Lucas on the show. I think this is going to be a classic. It just came out last year, How to Read the Holy Fathers, a guide for Orthodox Christians. And it takes you through those different genres, different styles of writing by the church fathers, because you're going to read poetry and hymns differently than you're going to read responses to heretics. So check out these books and more. Many of them are by Ancient Faith Publishing. All right, guys, we'll see you next time.
So I think, and that's why when I chose to write my thesis about the divine counsel in Tolkien's works, and I looked and looked and looked, has anyone else done this? The most I could find is someone on a forum somewhere on the internet said, oh, this would be interesting to talk about, wrote a couple of paragraphs, and then that was it. So I said, okay, I've been studying the divine counsel for some time now. I've been studying Tolkien for pretty much since I was 6 years old. So let's see what happens. And it was actually super fun to write. Almost didn't feel like work at all. And was really, really straightforward. And, my conclusion when I got to the end of it was the people who say this is simply pagan are simply wrong. But the people who say basically, no, this is monotheistic Christianity, where other gods don't even exist, also wrong. And so I analyzed it from a number of different angles. And the conclusion that I came to is that where Christianity and paganism differed on something, almost always his model at least leaned towards Christianity or was completely in that camp. There was one or two places where that was not the case. And there was some times where he created something else that was neither pagan nor Christian.
It sounds like him. Yeah.
Yeah. He was always about the remix.
Right.
Always. He was remixing everything. And then the places where most people say, that's pagan, most of those places actually are also Christian. So a plurality of divinity, multiple gods, also Christian, simply in the Bible. And it was amazing to me, like there's been divine council scholarship explicitly now for decades upon decades. And yet a lot of Tolkien scholars who are talking about Tolkien in terms of religion do not seem to know about it.
Well, it sounds like, the Western academic sort of university model where like you have all these silos that don't talk to each other. It's getting better now with podcasts. These scholars talk to each other, but 20 years ago, it just seemed like, man, not even the Old Testament and New Testament guys aren't even talking to each other. Man, it can be frustrating.
And so, I mean, that's the thing I've noticed is, and so you get different takes, like some will say, well, look, there's a lot of gods in there, so obviously this is not Christian. Or then some people would say, well, yes, he's trying to present monotheism, but it's actually pagan underneath, and then some people come up with, they use the phrase monotheistic polytheism. I'm like, just say divine counsel. Just say divine counsel. Like it's right there in the Psalms. It's okay.
So he only has one uncreated God, right?
That's right.
It's not like he's got a bunch of uncreated gods who are all demanding worship or something.
Right. So that's a key thing.
Right.
So this is one of the analyses I gave was on what's called cosmogony, which is basically where does the universe come from, but then where do the gods come from? Theogony, right? And so in paganism, I've read a bunch. I've not read all of it, but I've read a bunch of different pagan mythologies, and in them, the gods always come from somewhere. Whether it's out of a primordial kind of earth and the heavens mating with each other, or whatever you want to call it, rubbing up against each other. Or, my favorite is, the where the Norse gods come from, which is, that there's ice and there's a giant cow that's licking the ice and the gods emerge from that. That's so great. Although, as we all know, Norse mythology was written down by Christians, but so who knows what they were doing with that? They might've been making fun of them. But they always kind of come from somewhere out of something else. In Christianity and in the Silmarillion, which explicitly deals with this part of Tolkien's world, Eru Iluvatar, the Most High God in Christianity, is simply there at the beginning. It just says there was the one, in the Silmarillion, and of course, the Bible very famously begins with "In the beginning, God." Not in the beginning, God came from somewhere. In the beginning, God, was licked out of the ice or emerged. No. It just says God, and it's telling you what he was doing, right? That's how the Bible begins. And so that's pretty clearly, a score one on the Christian side, right, of analyzing Tolkien's gods. And then the other gods that he describes in the Silmarillion are created by Eru Iluvatar. They are created beings, right? So in pagan mythology, they are either all created or emerge, including whoever is the Most High God. But in the Silmarillion, there is one who is the Most High, who's uncreated, and then he creates the other gods. This is exactly a Christian model. So there's no quibbling about this one. There's no remix going on here. Tolkien was very, very precise in lining up his theogony with the Bible in this regard. There's other places that he's a little bit more slippery, but definitely not that one. And to me, like you could just say, oh, well, case closed based on that. But, that wouldn't be much of a thesis. So,
right. Because some of the other, and this is where I've kind of wrestled with, is when you read him, how much are the angels also creating?
Yes. Okay. So that's that's another big question. And in this case, Tolkien might seem to be leaning pagan. Okay. So you've got, you have the creation. So in Tolkien's work and in the Bible, the creation comes ex nihilo, right? Whereas in paganism, it comes out of what's called chaos kampf, this sort of chaos struggle at the beginning. And then in paganism, the world is created by the gods. in various kinds of ways. They're not creating it ex nihilo, that's for sure. They're always using pre-existing stuff, whether it's the body of a dead giant, which is how it is in Norse mythology. You've got Ymir, who his various parts of his body are thrown by Odin and Vili and Ve to become different. I mean, my favorite part of that story is that the brains become the clouds. So his skull is the firmament of the heavens, and then the brains of Ymir become the clouds of Norse mythology. I love that so much. And then of course in the Bible, God creates everything, and then humans then provide some shape to the world. So they engage in what's called subcreation. But then the angels are not depicted as doing subcreation. They do stewardship. They're not shaping the world, they're stewarding the world.
Right. They're like patron guardians of cities, but you don't see them actively creating
They
like
might push the sun and the moon around, but they're not making new mountains. Okay. Whereas in Tolkien's model, they're definitely making the world, and they participate in the blueprint that Iluvatar uses when he speaks the world into being. And then after he speaks that world into being, using the blueprint, which is a song, which is so amazing, then the Valar, these sort of the highest of his gods, they shape the world. So they go into the world and they shape it. So they are engaging in subcreation, although it's a bigger, sort of higher level of subcreation than human beings can engage in ourselves. Like, we can't make a mountain. I mean, the closest we can get is a ziggurat, of course, been done many times. So this was when I was kind of looking at, comparing, this was one that I said, okay, well, Tolkien's model is not exactly pagan, because it's not just many gods creating things. But it's not exactly Christian either. It's kind of somewhere in the middle, but it sort of leans Christian because you've got this ex nihilo creation by Eru Iluvatar. So like I said, some of these apologists who say, oh, it's simply Christian. Like, come on, guys. The problem with that is it comes across as dishonest.
Right.
You're not willing to admit anything that might be different than Christianity.
I think this is why people love him, whether you're Christian or not. He has this level of authenticity of creating his own world.
And he's not doing theology. He's writing a story.
Right.
He is writing a story. Tolkien is not trying to convert you to something. He's not trying to preach a sermon. Actually, he comments about sermons in one of his letters, which I love. He says he's writing to one of his sons, and he says, most sermons are bad, aren't they? Like, he clearly has opinions about the sermons he's heard, and then goes on about what he thinks makes a good one. But he explicitly says, like, for instance, in one of his essays, he talks about the incarnation, and he says the incarnation is a greater story than anything I would dare to write. So he's not daring to. He sometimes, he's leaning in these directions because he knows it's a really good story, but he won't. He's not doing theology. He's not.
And yet it does lead to some really fun sort of connections if you are a teacher, because
of course
I was a teacher talking to high school students, and I would bring him up talking about how he has this vision of how Melkor is disfiguring creation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? I mean, it's easy to talk about, like, okay, in Tolkien's world, it's easy to talk about where mosquitoes came from. It's like, well, Melkor like disfigured a fly and created the human fly.
Right. Yeah. So part of what happens in Tolkien's world is that some of the agency in this world that belongs to humanity is given to the Valar. Right. So the shaping of the world, for instance, but then also the introduction of evil and the destruction of this world.
Yeah.
So Melkor
being the fallen
right.
angel.
Melkor is a fallen angel, the devil, basically. Mm-hmm. But of course, there's a lot of other fallen angels too. There's the Balrogs. There's, Sauron, of course, is another one. And they can actually alter the world. They alter the cosmos, right? In Christianity, of course, that's not a thing. Not a thing. That any kind of darkness that comes in the world, destruction that comes in the world, is actually through the agency of humanity. That doesn't mean we're making like tsunami happen in a direct way, but it would be, I think, theologically correct to say that it's human sin in the world which results in so-called natural disasters. That the suffering in the world is through man. Now, the evil we bring into the world is because of our cooperation with demonic powers. but we are the conduit through which evil comes into the world. It doesn't just sort of, it doesn't have a separate existence. And so Tolkien, of course, wouldn't say it has a separate existence because he's kind of very Boethian in this regard. But nonetheless, he would say that fallen angels, the fallen Valar, fallen Maiar, they can break the world, right? Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. These are really fun discussions because it's like he's definitely Christian as a person, but yet in his artistic expression, he's willing to offer up something that is deeply Christian at the same time, authentically just his own.
Yeah.
Not
And
the-
right, and I think this is part of why I think he appeals to everybody. I've actually, it was funny. So this actually, if I can give a little bit of an advertisement, possibly. Okay.
Yeah.
So a little advertisement. This is relevant. I'm not just giving an advertisement. Okay. So this fall, Labor Day weekend at All Saints Orthodox Church in Raleigh, North Carolina, is the event called Doxamut, and it is the Orthodox Christian Tolkien Conference. It's being put on by Ancient Faith Ministries and then co-sponsored by the St. Basil Center for Orthodox Thought and Culture, of course, connected to the Amun Sewell podcast, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Which, I mean, I just had Dr. Cyril Jenkins on.
Okay.
We were
so
advertising it just in a few
Oh,
episodes.
good. Yeah, he'll be one of the speakers.
We're
I'll be
totally
speaking.
comfortable advertising it.
Yeah, Deacon Seraphim Roland will be speaking as well. Get those tickets at ancientfaith.com/events. But I mentioned this because I was advertising this online, and then someone said, "Oh, you're appropriating Catholic culture." And I mean, I understand what he's saying. I understand, but here's the thing: if the Lord of the Rings should only be talked about, or any of Tolkien's works should only be talked about by Roman Catholics, it would be a poor world. It would be a poor world, and I mean, it's not like Tolkien said, "Well, I'll cash that royalty check so long as you can assure me that my books were only bought by my fellow Catholics." That's just not a thing. And I'm sure the Tolkien estate is very happy that non-Catholics are reading and watching and talking about Tolkien's works. So, like I said, no Orthodox Christian is claiming that Tolkien was secretly Orthodox, nothing like that, but rather that we can get great joy and benefit from that. But I think the fact that there's no agenda in his works, I think is why it's so universally loved, and, I think in some ways he's maybe not on purpose, but he's subversively shaping the hearts and the imaginations of people in a beautiful
I think so.
way. Like I've sometimes said that one of the reasons some people ask me, why did you become Orthodox? And I have a lot of different reasons I give to that question, and to give, as an answer to that question. But one of them I say, well, Tolkien made me Orthodox. And what I mean by that is that Tolkien shaped my imagination to want a world that is not only enchanted, has an unseen aspect that's present and active and affecting everything, but also has a depth and layers upon layers upon layers of history and tradition and all of that stuff. And you just kind of don't find it anywhere except the Orthodox Church. Maybe some little pockets of Roman Catholicism. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to make, say something mean about my Catholic friends, but I think you guys know what I mean. Most Catholic churches these days, it's been very stripped. It's been very, very stripped of a lot of what was your tradition if you're a Roman Catholic. So, please bring that back, you guys. It would be so much better. But so yeah, he definitely shaped my heart and my desires and my imagination and my taste and so forth. And what I loved as fiction when I was young, I came to encounter in many ways as real when I became an adult and when I became an Orthodox Christian, now almost 30 years ago. And and so there's been this reciprocal experience that I've had where my love of Tolkien prepared me to love the Orthodox Church, but then also as I've learned more Orthodox tradition and just been experienced it for decades now, that I've been able to reread Tolkien in deeper ways and ways that I find even more delightful. So I just keep coming back to it over and over again. I don't know how many times I've read a lot of these works, No plans to stop.
Good. No, that's good. For me, he definitely was a good introduction to what a sacramental
Yeah,
worldview looks like,
absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
And I'm oftentimes asked a question by people who are desiring, "Hey, I wanna be like an Orthodox apologist." And I'm like, "Oof, you sure?" Like, it would be better, like, let's go, let's peel that back and, like, want to be a catechist, like, want to just know what the teachings are first. And then
Yeah,
before that, like, what does it mean to even be a father who's
right,
just passing on the faith to his kids?
right.
And before that, what does it just mean to be a Christian, to look at the world,
Yeah,
from a
yeah.
sacramental worldview? So
I
you just peeling those layers back, I think.
exactly, and I think, like, underneath all of that, what Tolkien gives is a profound encounter with what it means to be human. There's so many, especially in the Lord of the Rings, but in the Silmarillion and the Hobbit as well, and then, some of the other ancillary texts, there's so many powerful human moments. Like, the one that comes to my mind right now is Theoden, the king of Rohan, mourning his son, Theodred, um, and he says, "My line is ended. My line is over." And of course, his kingship will be carried on, along by his nephew, Eomer.
Mhm.
But just like this profound sense of loss that cannot be fixed, and yet there is still hope that comes, within that. And of course, Theoden dies a very, very heroic, very self-sacrificial death. Um, or like the scouring of the Shire, right? Which of course, never makes it into the movies. The scouring, which I don't know how you would do it, honestly. It would be weird.
Right.
It would
My
be
son and I were just talking about this. He just finished Return of the King on our
Yeah.
spring break trip
It
last
would
week.
it
He
would be
just
weird.
finished it.
It
Yeah.
would be weird, like, but the scouring of the Shire, I mean, things are set to rights, but things are also never the same. It can't be put back. Like the whole thing where, like, there's this bad meme out there where someone says, where they take a couple of different quotes from Tolkien and they stick them together to create something new. Where it says something like, that J.R. Tolkien said, "The birth and death and resurrection of Christ means that everything sad is going to come untrue." So these are two things that he said stuck together to create a new thing, which he never said. He does talk about the birth, death, and resurrection of Christ. Like, this is mentioned in On Fairy Stories, great,
Right.
amazing essay that everyone should read who loves Tolkien. But then, is everything going to come sad? Going to come untrue? Is a line from Sam towards the end of Return of the King, where I think he sees Gandalf for the first time, and as far as he knew, Gandalf was dead and fallen down in Moria with the Balrog. This is Sam finally seeing him. Is everything sad going to come untrue? And the answer to that question is no, it's not. No, it's not, Sam. There's hope for tomorrow, and you'll be healed, and Frodo will be healed, but everything sad is not going to come untrue. Frodo leaves the Shire, and he leaves it forever. And there's no way that didn't affect Sam in a deep, sad way for most of his life. He does eventually join Frodo, many, many years later, but there's always going to be the sadness there. And I think it's stuff like this sort of basic humanity that, particularly in our age where, I mean, here you and I are talking through the internet, two people on the internet, but in this age where everything's disembodied, I think that there's something wholesome, something curative about Tolkien's works that, like, if we're going to be good Christians, we need to be good humans, because Christianity is human. And I think that when you take away that humanity, and by that I don't mean like just the emotional side of what it means to be human. That's not what I mean. I mean something deeper, much, much deeper than that. When you take away that humanity, then what you have is something very hard and very, very painful. It's just an ideology. And so Tolkien in many ways is an antidote for ideology, I think.
He is. There are many father figures that I have found in Lord of the Rings. It's kind of an odd thing to say, right? Like in a book, father figures or like role models, but he embodies in these figures virtue.
Yeah.
And it's a great gift to my own children.
Yep.
It's one of these things where Hollywood and even the internet, even if it's religious, is offering all these kinds of models for what it means to be a human. But when I point them to scripture, and I point them to the saints and the church fathers and the martyrs, but I can even give them something that's fiction that shows them kind of the way of what
Yeah,
it means to be a human. It's a great
absolutely.
gift. I mean, it
Absolutely.
makes fathering a little bit easier, as hard as it
Yeah,
is.
yeah, yeah. Thank God.
Yeah, we just got back from a spring break trip, and the kids, I was kind of waiting for their Lord of the Rings moment. They knew I was a big fan, but I've kind of been waiting on them for a while. And they've been reading other fiction and other works, but they finally got to it. And my two oldest sons, it's finally like clicked. We were going through the caves, and Gollum was all around us, and you can be in kind of this fantasy nerd state, which you can live in that world. For me, it's more about talking about these different figures as in terms of what it means to be a human. Gollum could have been fully human or fully who he was
Yes.
supposed to be, but he didn't. He didn't choose.
Gollum and many. So it's interesting to think about the fact that, for instance, that Gollum and the Nazgul each represent a distortion of humanity. Gollum in a hobbity way, because I mean, hobbits are in some ways are kind of a subset of humans. And then the Nazgul, so Gollum really is he's the passion of hunger. I'm not saying he stands for that, like it's not an allegory in that sense, but he is. And whereas the Nazgul are really, they're overcome with the passion of pride and the desire for control, for power, and of course both are slaves to the ring, right, which is about the will to dominate. And I think that those images provide powerful monuments in the soul that we can always look at and say, okay, don't go there. If you give yourself over to this passion, then that's what's going to happen to you. You will become, if you give yourself over to the passion of hunger, then you'll become like Gollum. If it's all about power and control and pride, the desire not to be impinged upon by other people, even to have them say something bad about you, then you can become like the Nazgul, in which you become the most frightening thing that most people will ever encounter, and that everyone will flee from, right? And that instead of their words having the possibility of healing and something useful, it's the black breath, right? So like I have in mind, like I realized as I was writing my thesis, I really need to write two theses. And then the other one is about theosis and anti-theosis in Tolkien's work. So anyone listening to this, don't steal my idea.
Yeah.
I already have all the notes. So anyway, but
that would be that would be a good journal article.
No. I mean, if someone wants to write that stuff, I would love to read it. I've thought about. I occasionally do think about turning the thesis into the beginning of a book, and then continuing to write and so forth. Because there's all kinds of stuff I didn't talk about in there that I could have easily. That would, of course, be connected with the divine council, connected with theosis, like stars, for instance. Stars are a huge element in the imaginarium of this legendarium, and they're connected with the gods, and there's light connected with people who are holy and elevated and so forth. Like I was just reading the chapter The White Rider in the Two Towers, and there's this point where when Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli they first meet Gandalf, the resurrected Gandalf, in Fangorn Forest. And there's a point where they're talking, but there's a point in there. It's interesting. I don't remember reading this before. I mean, I read it for sure, but I don't remember really noticing it before. There's a point where their conversation dies down, and Gandalf is sort of sitting thoughtfully by himself. And it says he's got his hands palms upward on his knees, and it said that they were cupped, and it was like they were filled with light. I mean, there's just all kinds of stuff like this throughout these works, where light is coming off of someone or in their eyes or falling down at their feet. Like this is especially associated with the elves, who are sort of the higher, of the children of Iluvatar. But of course, Gandalf, now back from the dead, now transfigured, filled with light, all of this kind of stuff. He's literally, his hands are cupped and there's just light pooling in his hands. Yeah, so there's interesting, weird stuff going on in there that, again, like if you're not an Orthodox Christian, you might not really notice that. But we have this whole theology of the uncreated light, this whole theology of theosis and stuff, all these elements that other Christians don't tend to explore because it's just sort of not on their radar. I'm not saying it's not in their traditions. It certainly can be. I mean, even Jonathan Edwards, the fire and brimstone Calvinist preacher, he had a whole doctrine of theosis, which is
Right.
crazy to imagine, but he did. He did. And of course, it's in Catholic tradition as well. But it's front and center for us. Absolutely, just front and center for us.
Undoubtedly so. Yeah, I've kind of explored some of those areas, whether you're talking about Aquinas or Bonaventure or Jonathan Edwards and the beatific vision and the uncreated light and how that gets packaged. It's an interesting discussion, but yeah, you're right. When you read Lord of the Rings as an Orthodox Christian, you do see this kind of whole tradition of light passing
Yeah.
through.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal.
There is a scholar, and I don't know if she has any religious commitments. I don't know. But she's a friend of a few different friends of mine. So maybe I could ask them if she's ever said anything about it. But anyway, there's a scholar named Verlyn Flieger, and she's one of the greatest living Tolkien scholars. She's quite up there in age now, but she still lectures and teaches and stuff. She's mostly retired though, but she wrote a book called Splintered Light. And it is about sort of examining themes of light in Tolkien's work. And it's brilliant stuff. But it's more about the way he does storytelling and subcreation. It's a book about subcreation, really.
Mhm.
And so that's what's going on there. And I don't think, I would have to look at it again, but I don't think she ever connects it with this sense of uncreated light and so forth. There's a lot to do. There's a lot to do. Even though, like I said, there's mountains of Tolkien scholarship, including mountains of religious Tolkien scholarship. We Orthodox Christians, I think, we're just getting started. And this is part of why we do Doxamut, is we want to bring in other people that, even if this isn't their specialty, right? Like none of us who are speaking at Doxamut or have ever spoken about at Doxamut have Tolkien scholarship as our main focus of scholarship. Most of us are kind of also doing other things, but we all love Tolkien. And so it's great to kind of bring in a sort of interdisciplinary manner, the way that we talk about Tolkien and it makes for some fun stuff. Like I have a whole talk that I do about Tolkien and giants, and which there absolutely is. There's all kinds of crazy giant stuff in Tolkien, including like, the way we would think of Nephilim and people descended from gods and all this kind of stuff. So
Yeah, that's wild stuff. I mean, I think when I think about his theme of tying in light and the two trees in the Eucharist can be quite powerful, because
oh yeah,
then you're combining Eucharistic participation in Christ and theosis all together.
Yeah.
Right? These are not detached from the community. They're not
Yep.
detached from worship. It's not like we're doing theosis in our own little isolated bubbles. It's all integrated. And for me, when I talk about Orthodox Christianity, to me, it's just like we're talking about what's the most integrated form of Christianity.
Right, exactly. And I think this is what Orthodox Christians, what we have to bring to Tolkien scholarship is a more integrated approach. So
Yeah.
another example, for instance, is I have a whole paper that I did on the harrowing of Hades in Tolkien's works, and I'm not the first person ever to talk about that theme in Tolkien's works. I found some papers out there, and I use them in my work because if someone else has talked about what you're talking about, you should interact with that if you're going to be a good scholar. And so, but what I found is that the scholarship that dealt with it, it was good, but it tended to be kind of surface level. And again, harrowing of Hades is another thing that Orthodox Christians, like, we feel it deep down in our guts, and when we're recording this, we're just a couple of weeks away from Pascha, a few weeks away from Pascha. And so, we're about to go harrow Hades ourselves. We're not going to just read about it. We're going to go participate in it. And as an example of this more integrated approach, what I said, which was one of the things I found when harrowing of Hades was discussed in Tolkien's works, is that there was one episode that kept getting left out in anyone mentioning it, and I was talking about this theme, and I was like, well, why is this not happening? And then I took a close look at this episode, and I realized actually this has way more harrowing of Hades elements in it than any of these other things. There's lots of journeys into the underworld in one level or another in Tolkien's works, and coming out the other end. But the one that has the most harrowing of Hades elements, so an entrance into the underworld, people dying and coming back to life, references to flooding, because the water and the underworld are connected in most ancient models, treasure being brought up out, people being sort of commissioned to do something greater, exorcism of evil spirits. You might be guessing by now what I'm talking about, and that's Fog on the Barrow Downs, where you get Tom Bombadil bringing the hobbits up out of the barrow. Like, it's the most harrowing of Hades scene in the whole Legendarium.
Yeah, it is.
And it's got all this stuff in it. It's unbelievable just how many kind of elements of that are there. And
it's not a stretch either, because I mean, when you look at the scripture, it's so biblical. When you look at, like, let's say, I think it's Ephesians chapter 4, right? So Christ descends to the lowest parts of the earth so that he can ascend out of it and bring us treasures, right? Which is also Pentecostal language, right? He's won, and he shares the war victory of treasure that he's won with us.
This is why there's so many pieces of Tolkien scholarship that talk about the Bombadil chapters as being this kind of useless interlude. And of course, he didn't make it into the Peter Jackson films. I have not yet watched season 2 of the Rings of Power. I've heard they're talking about season 3 sometime soon here.
I've only made it to season 1. I don't know if I can go further.
I don't know. I don't know.
Find out.
I'm ambivalent about that stuff. But I know that he shows up in season 2. He showed up in a Soviet version of the Lord of the Rings in the 80s. But largely speaking, most cinema viewers don't know Tom Bombadil. And they'll say this doesn't advance the plot in any way. And I beg to differ. I stand on the corner, at an intersection with my big sign up and beg to differ. Like, there's this amazing moment, for instance, when Tom brings them up out of the barrow. It says he lifts up his right hand, and then he speaks these sort of words of blessing over them. I'm like, this is a priestly moment. Like, they're coming out of the water. They're coming with white robes on. They're coming with crowns. Like, they've just been baptized, and he's their priest. Like, this is crazy how many weird things there are in this that all kind of point in that direction.
Yeah, there's a new Adam and new Eve theme to their whole realm.
And they're about to finally go, and they're being armed with what they need. Like, the thing that's going to kill, that's going to make the killing of the Witch King of Angmar possible gets pulled up out of that barrow. Right. So, I mean, there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on there. And again, it's not because, like, I'm some great scholar or whatever that I see this. It's just that I'm Orthodox, and I'm swimming in Orthodox tradition all the time, because I'm in church all the time, and because I'm serving services, and I'm just trying to be a faithful Orthodox Christian. So, yeah, it's to me, there's just so much that we could do. And I think that speaking to other Orthodox Christians who love Tolkien, they're often just super delighted and surprised, to hear these things. But then also speaking to people who are not Orthodox Christians, and I say, look, with this interpretive tradition that I have, and I'm applying this, what do you think of that? And I've had people, I've met people that came to Doxamut who were not Orthodox when they came, and they encountered Orthodox tradition, and they became Orthodox as a result of that. So it's, even though it's not designed to be an evangelistic thing, and the work that I've done on Tolkien is not designed to be evangelistic at all. Again, like, I don't want it to be apologetics. People are still, it becomes a door that some people are entering into the church through.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised. I mean, I think because of how Orthodox Christianity values worship, it's almost kind of a worship first approach. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's the phrase that I use.
Yeah. I mean, bring them the delight, the beauty, the power. That's why we're here. That's what I came for.
Yeah.
The people who read Tolkien for political or kind of culture war reasons or whatever, it just makes me so sad. It's just so sad.
Yeah, it would be the shallowest of layers in a sense.
People do it, they're free to do it, but
right. Right. So so one thing you have to talk about is how Bombadil connects to the divine council, because I have no idea.
Oh, well, okay. So I can tell you,
Gandalf wants to hang out with him right after the ring's destroyed. So
I
it's like
mean,
first person he wants to talk to.
I really want to sit at that table. Oh man, I feel like I'm, a Rolling Stone that's starting to acquire some moss myself now, being firmly middle aged. Um, yeah. So my friend Father Anthony Cook, that we handed the Amansul podcast over to when Deacon Seraphim and I were done and wanted to move on. He has a whole worked out theory about how Bombadil is Aule, one of the Valar, and that Goldberry is Yavanna, so the spouse of Aule. And I mean, it's not nothing that he bases this on, but I'm not convinced. There's too much about their character that I think doesn't really fit those two Valar. So the question, I mean, people ask this question: what exactly is Tom Bombadil? Like, what is this guy? It's one of the big mysteries. If you want to take the let's dig through the soup and find the bones approach, which of course Tolkien was not a fan of. Actually, most Tolkien scholarship is basically about doing stuff he didn't like.
Right.
We're digging through the soup to find the bones. Although I'm really interested in also to talk about how does it taste, which that's what he was really much more into. There's no good answer for this question. But if you the most obvious bone is that apparently that there was a doll that belonged to one of Tolkien's children, and the doll was named Tom Bombadil. And he wrote poetry about the doll as a kind of thing for his kids, which this becomes a number of the poems that are published in the volume called The Adventures of Tom Bombadil. So if you're a big Bombadil fan and you've never read that, you should absolutely read it. It's basically almost, not completely, but almost completely consistent with the Bombadil that we see in The Lord of the Rings. It has, of course, the meter, the poetic meter that Bombadil speaks in, which is trochaic, and usually it's trochaic tetrameter, although not always. But I mean, this meter is what's called the Kalevalan meter, also because Tom Bombadil in some ways seems to possibly be the figure Vainamoinen in the Kalevala, which is Finnish mythological poetry. Vainamoinen is this sort of spell singer. He sings songs and things happen. He gets involved in a big epic battle, bard battle with another spell singer named Youkahainen. And ends up actually Youkahainen gets trapped in quicksand as a result of Vainamoinen's songs. So there's definitely a lot of Vainamoinen going on in Tom Bombadil. But within the legendarium, my best guess is that he's one of the Maiar, a sort of secondary angelic being, and that Goldberry is as well. That's, if we had to classify them, that's where we would go. But he's eldest. He was there before the Dark Lord came, and he probably means Morgoth / Melkor, not just Sauron. Yeah, it's not clear. And I think the reason why I don't think he's Aule is because he's bound in his space. He's master of the old forest, and that's it. He's got these boundaries. That's where he's master, but that's all there is to it. I mean, you could make an argument and say, well, this is Aule kind of in retirement or something. I don't know. But yeah, it's just not clear to me. I like him to be a crux. I like him to just be this thing that doesn't make any sense, but that the story kind of turns in a really significant way when it comes to where he is, that he's someone over whom the ring has no power. That's another reason why I don't think that he could be someone as powerful as one of the Valar. Gandalf, it's interesting. In the movies, Gandalf can't even touch the ring. But in the book, he does hold it. In Shadow of the Past, in the early chapter there, he picks it up, looks at it. But Bombadil can put it on his finger and nothing happens to him. So obviously his kind of need for power, desire for power, whatever, is so muted or non-existent. And that's just not very Aule, is my opinion. Anyway, so, Father Anthony Cook, if you're listening to this one, I'm sorry, I just disagree with you on this. But I mean, you make a good argument, Father, But yeah, he's just an oddity. who knows exactly what it is he is. I love him. I love Goldberry. Of the various places that I'd like to go hang out for a week that are in Middle Earth, his house is definitely one of them.
Yeah, we want to go have a big feast there and just kind of spend some time.
Absolutely,
He
absolutely.
definitely is a good embodiment and challenge for many of our Orthodox homes to just be a place of hospitality for the visiting stranger.
Yes.
That's how I take it.
Yeah. I think, especially for us who are converts to Orthodox Christianity, often, usually in if we had former religious experience, there was often not a lot of tradition or discipline or asceticism. And so we really kind of gravitate towards that kind of stuff because as a kind of corrective to where we were. But we should also remember that the church doesn't just command us to fast. The church commands us to feast. Like, you can actually get excommunicated, according to the canons, for fasting on a feast day. You can get excommunicated for fasting on a feast day. So, I just like to remind people of that. I'm not super great at either one of those things. Probably it's easier for me to feast. I like to feast, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Like, this is a desire that God put in us, especially to love our fellow human beings. There's something about putting together a table. There's something about bringing together a bunch of your friends and family, and they sit and they eat and they talk and they connect, and there's this kind of spirit that governs the whole thing, and that is from God.
Mm-hmm.
That is absolutely from God. And Bombadil, he's got that down. Goldberry, they got that down. Hobbits got that down. Hobbits have it down.
This is why we love them. I think there is this innate love for hobbits because they kind of represent everything we've lost in the modern age. We have loneliness where more people are eating by themselves more than ever. And we're not on any kind of adventure. We're trapped in our own desire.
I mean, and Bilbo is weird because of this. Bilbo, everyone thinks he's weird because he's this old bachelor. He's weird. But it's interesting that even Bilbo, he can't stay that way. He brings Frodo to live with him.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
And he's the host. He's the host, really, the host of the Lord of the Rings.
Indeed.
The long-expected party is the greatest party in any of those books. Yeah.
I was going to see what you thought about this, but I think Tolkien has helped me understand a little bit more about typology because it's all throughout his novels. I mean, you see that, of course, in scriptures where it's not just Christ is the new Adam, but even Noah is a little new Adam in a sense. But
absolutely.
Christ is the second Adam, the new Adam. But even Noah is a little Adam. And our Orthodox, tradition does this in our icons, in our stories of the saints. The Theotokos is like the new Eve, but you even see that in Mary Magdalene in the garden. And so when we talk about like Tom Bombadil being a new Adam, it's like we don't have to answer all the questions about who he is because he's just one of these typologies. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, he's a new Adam. So he's a type of Adam, but he's also a type of Christ. Although actually, I don't remember seeing any papers, whatever, talking about Bombadil as a type of Christ because I don't know, people don't take him seriously enough. He's certainly a new Adam, a type of Adam in that he's the master, and Adam, of course, was made to be the master. And he also, like animals, all respond to him in this very obedient and wonderful and loving way, which is, Adam naming the animals. This is how the creation was set up to be. Adam putting everything in order. Bombadil, of course, also doing this as well in his very whimsical way. But he is also a type of Christ. We don't ever see Adam laying down a banquet. But when people are talking about, types of Christ in literature and including in the Lord of the Rings and other Middle Earth texts, they don't point out Christ as host of the banquet. Usually it's almost always Christ in terms of his suffering, his death, his resurrection, even, which of course, very powerful stuff. Don't get me wrong, but Christ is also the one who lays the banquet. This is depicted in the Gospels. And of course, there's a great feast that's depicted in the Apocalypse at the end. So and he is the great high priest, and the priest is fundamentally someone who feeds you, right? That's what a priest is he's also a layer of the banquet.
Mhm.
So yeah, all of that is going on as well. It's just, I don't know, it's just gorgeous, gorgeous stuff.
It is. The Wise Phone 2, which I currently use as my phone. It's an amazing phone that helps you not doom scroll or be addicted to social media and other vices because it doesn't have a web browser, but it does function like a phone. You can call, you can text, you can take pictures, you can do videos. It even has apps like Uber and Lyft. You can order food, maps to get around town, all the things that you kind of need in this modern life. While at the same time, being able to have a boundary between you and work or you and distractions. So you can be more present with your family, with your kids, with your spouse, whomever. This has been a very freeing experience for me to have the Wise Phone 2. Again, you can get $40 off through my discount code KING today. Bringing it back to the divine council as we kind of wrap up today's episode. I mean, I think when we look at Middle Earth and we see a figure like Manwe,
Oh, sure.
I mean, my question is this a Christ-like figure? Is this a Saint Michael figure? What role does he play in the Middle Earth
Yeah.
divine
Yeah.
council, right?
Yeah. So
Christ regent.
as I was analyzing this question about whether the divine council in the legendarium is more pagan or more Christian, this was the category, the sort of the vice regent of the divine council. So the divine, we didn't mention this earlier, but almost all divine council models, pagan and Christian, there's always the one who is the highest, the high God, and then there's this vice regent who kind of rules over the divine council on behalf of the most high God. Not in all of them, but in some, in most of them, I should say. And this was the area where Tolkien's model is different from both paganism and Christianity in most respects, and leans pagan in one respect. So anyway, there's several things. They all have a vice regent. This is everywhere. So like, for instance, the vice in Ugaritic Canaanite paganism, you've got El is the most high God, and then Baal, his vice regent, who rules the divine council. You've got Odin and Thor in Norse mythology. And it seems that maybe some really archaic Greek stuff, you have Kronos and Zeus, maybe. Hard to know. Like, if there was ever Kronos worship, it's not clear that was the case. But there's some archaeology, I think, that suggests that, and maybe some texts. And then of course in Christianity you have God the Father, and then you have the Son of God, who is the one who presides in the divine council, right? So you've got this highest God, and then another figure who presides over the council on behalf of the high God. So in paganism, the vice regent is of the same nature as the most high God, right? Same nature. In Christianity, the vice regent, Son of God, is of the same nature as the Father. This is explicitly in our creeds, right? Of one essence with the Father, consubstantial with the Father, homoousios.
He's the only one that is.
He's the only one that is.
They all are, right?
Yes. He's the only one that is.
Yeah.
But speaking about this vice regent figure in particular, and then in Tolkien's model, he's of a different nature from the Most High God. So Manwe, who rules over the Valar, the King of Earth, he's called. He's of a different nature than Eru Ilúvatar. So that's where he's not pagan or Christian. He's kind of doing something else, right? He's doing something else. And then, how does this figure compare to the Most High God? Well, in paganism, it's usually a somewhat lesser, separate divine figure. In Christianity, it's an equal and unseparate divine figure, right? So different in both those respects. But then in not just Middle Earth, but Arda generally, it's a lesser and separate divine figure. So Manwe in this respect is definitely pagan,
Mm-hmm.
lesser figure, a separate person, not of one essence, separate figure, separate divinity, different kind of divinity. Okay. So then in paganism, the vice regent is definitely worshipped. In fact, that's where most of the worship is directed, is at the vice regent. So if you're a Ugaritic pagan, you're basically mostly worshiping Baal, and not really El, actually. El is kind of in the background. If you're Norse pagan, you're definitely worshiping Thor. We know this from archaeology. You're definitely worshiping Thor, and not so much Odin. He's kind of in the background. In Christianity, you are definitely worshiping the Son of God and you're worshiping the Father, but Jesus is kind of more front and center than the Father is. Not that he's in the background. He's not. But you know, Jesus is the one through whom we know the Father. He's the one that's revealing the Father, right? But Christianity and paganism in this regard are pretty close in that the vice regent is worshipped. In Tolkien's world, the vice regent is not worshipped. So he's different from both, right? So I analyzed kind of four things in this question. And in one, it's equal across the board: paganism, Christianity, Tolkien. And the second one, it's paganism and Christianity are equal. Tolkien's totally different. In the third, Tolkien is like pagan and not Christian. And then in the fourth one, paganism and Christianity are basically the same, not exactly the same, but basically the same. And then Tolkien did something again different. The vice regent is not worshipped. And so, what is Manwe? Who does he correspond to in Christianity? If you're trying to come up with, well, he's like Christ in certain ways, but he's also like the Archangel Michael. That's the one that usually most people kind of point to, in that he's sort of the head of the armies, but the sort of lesser figure. But he's also like Adam in that he is the king of the world. I've meant to explore that particular thing. I actually have on a piece of paper that's been floating around my podcasting desk here. I just wrote Manwe equals Adam ? And I haven't done anything with it, So I think there's definitely something there to sort of explore, But yeah, so Manwe is this other figure. He lives on top of a mountain, which is an Adam thing, but it's also an Archangel Michael thing. The Archangel Michael is often associated with the tops of mountains, and wind is associated with the Archangel Michael. Tall towers, windy rocks out in the ocean, like Skellig Michael off of Ireland, where I'm going in July.
Fun.
I'm so pumped. It may be the most epic place I will have ever set foot on.
Because you can't even travel to that island at certain times of the year. You can only go like when the seas are calm enough. Is that right?
Yeah, generally speaking, summer is best, and then not even every day. So you have to just sort of we're going to be hanging around the area for a week. We have a day that we bought our tickets for, but I'm pretty sure that if it doesn't work out that day, we can be like, well, how about tomorrow? How about the next day? To kind of figure that out. So yeah. But like I said, we'll be hanging around for a week. I'm just super pumped about this visit. Don't worry, we'll be bringing cameras.
Good.
That's why we're going. Yeah.
This is a rare moment because I looked into this like years ago. I mean, of course, Star Wars made this popular. Luke Skywalker's on the island, like in the modern era. For those that don't know anything about church history, he kind of made it popular. Star Wars people did, but you've got these beehive huts.
Yes,
and this
it's
whole
like 14,
that's there.
1,500-year-old monastic settlement, and according to certain traditions connected with Skellig Michael, the Archangel Michael flew from there and joined St. Patrick in the final battle against the sort of serpentine demonic forces of Ireland. And there's this great army of the saints that joined together with him. And it is this absolutely epic scene. So yes, we're ready to go. Yes, ready to go.
We're connecting all the March dates. We just connected the Annunciation with
there you go,
St. Patrick's Day.
Exactly. So yeah, Manwe is an interestingly ambiguous figure. You could probably write a whole book just about Manwe and explore the different kinds of figures that he corresponds to, religiously speaking, especially in terms of Christianity. So, like I said, there's a lot to do, everybody. So get those papers going.
Well, there we go. Yes, there are many to be written still. And
right.
It's fun that you connected Manwe with Adam, because if Adam is the vice regent of creation originally, right? Of course, he fails in his role. It gives you this more epic understanding of what a human is. And we began our episode talking about, we kind of have I grew up with a low view of angels, a low view of humans. And we do this because we want to make God so great, but in that we might actually miss something that he's revealed about who we're supposed to be.
We've disconnected him from creation. The fact of the incarnation reverberates all through creation, reverberates through especially mankind. So Christ is what Adam should have been. He is the new Adam. And and Adam is saved in him. I mean, according to Orthodox tradition, Adam and Eve are saints because they repented. Because they repented. It's not depicted in Scripture. The repentance is not depicted there, but according to tradition, they are saints. They show up in All Saints icons with halos. So they made it. You can name your kids Adam and Eve. It's all right. Don't if you have one boy and one girl, it would be weird to don't do that. But but yeah, Christ is what Adam should have been. Yeah, and it's interesting. There's a little echo in that, in like, Gandalf is what Saruman should have been. So there's like, again, Tolkien is just like the remixer. He takes this stuff and says, well, what if I apply it over here? What if I make this figure good rather than evil? Or if I make it evil rather than good, what happens if I flip this over here? Just the sheer brilliance of that man. That's why we just keep reading him over and over again.
It seems like when you read Lord of the Rings, you almost can kind of see the positive version of what we can become, like our future eschatological selves if we are transfigured and resurrected, or we can see the version that we don't want to become, the disfigurement, right? It's just like you can see both characters all throughout the novel.
Absolutely. Like who is the opposite of the Witch King of Angmar? Aragorn. Aragorn is what a king should be. But and Aragorn even has a priestly aspect to him. Right. He goes and he gets he goes in this high hallow, as it's called, meaning a holy place that's high up. And he gets the sapling of the white tree and brings it. And the place that he goes is a place that the kings of the Númenóreans would go to offer up prayer to Ilúvatar. And he's fulfilling what was done back on Númenor. He's doing the same thing. Right. So he functions as this priestly king figure. Whereas the Witch King of Angmar he has no kingdom left, and he's a witch, not a priest. They're just like mirror versions of each other. And Aragorn is what the Witch King should have been.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way to read the novel. I think it not only is it true as a form of literature, but it's true for our own, like applying this to ourselves on who we can become, because both possibilities are real. And St. Paul, and in Scripture he's always saying, pray that I don't shipwreck my faith. Don't become this other version, but rather this version.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
When it comes to the women in Lord of the Rings, I think this was a preparation for my understanding of the Theotokos, like encountering Galadriel. I knew, of course, of Mary in reading my scripture as a Baptist, but I think when I encountered someone like Galadriel, I was almost being prepared to not only understand the communion of saints better, but even the Theotokos. I don't know if you had a similar experience.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many Marian figures in the legendarium. Galadriel, of course, is the one that everyone goes to and should, for sure. But of course, also there's Elbereth, Varda, the star kindler, the spouse of Manwe, right? So she is Eve. She is the Theotokos, who is the new Eve. She is all these things, and people call upon Elbereth. Both the elves and, of course, a couple of hobbits call upon Elbereth in the Lord of the Rings. But I mean, I think that in some ways, all the feminine figures of the Lord of the Rings is Tolkien working out all the things he thinks about the Virgin Mary.
Yeah, I think so too.
Or at least a lot of them, right? There's even like, it's interesting. Like, you wouldn't think, for instance, that Eowyn is a Marian figure, but she is actually, because she's the Theotokos in terms of, it's taking the story and flipping it in another direction. So in the Christian tradition, what you get, and Galadriel is this too, by the way. In the Christian tradition, what you get is sort of the humility of the Theotokos is the beginning of the story, and then her as a kind of an invincible warrior against the dark powers is the telos of the story, right? Like, we call her, the champion leader, champion general. I mean, in Greek, hypermacho, right? In the famous hymn, the Kondakion of the Akathist, actually, although it's associated also with the Annunciation, just to bring the Annunciation back in. Right. This sort of general, right? But Galadriel, she's a warrior in her youth, and then has this more kind of stately, serene sort of image later. Like when we meet her in Lord of the Rings, she's lived a long life and has gone through a lot. But when you meet her in the Silmarillion, she's kind of a tough chick, in some ways. Like this is one of the complaints a lot of people had about the first season of The Rings of Power. Is they're like, oh, how could you make Galadriel into a warrior? I'm just like, okay, they kind of somewhat, not completely, but they kind of got that one right, actually. She was ambitious and militaristic, and she came to Middle-earth because she wanted to rule. She wanted her own kingdom, and then the arc of her character is her being offered power, offered the ring, and she says, no, I will diminish and remain Galadriel and go into the West. So she gives up kingdom entirely, is the last thing, right? And then Éowyn, her arc is very similar to Galadriel's, except that we get to actually meet her as a shield maiden. We get to meet her as this one who's fighting directly against evil. And then she takes on this role, with her marriage to Faramir, this queenly role as a healer, and a more kind of humble approach, whatever. And the truth is that the Theotokos is all of those things all at once in every part of her life, right? The narrative arc kind of goes from one to the other, but it's not like she leaves the humility and serenity and beauty behind. By no means. That is still our primary depiction of her. There are a few icons of her, like with helmets, with a helmet and a sword, but that's not the primary image of the Theotokos. But we do call her, the champion leader at the same time. So it's all of that at once. And so just about every feminine figure in these texts, in one way or another, can be that way. And then even in dark ways too, right? So Shelob, and then Ungoliant, this is the dark, evil version of motherhood, of giving life, all of that kind of stuff. It's
right.
They're the devouring mother, right?
And you see this all throughout the book of Revelation. Jezebel, and the prostitute who's drinking the blood of the saints, versus the lady in Revelation 13, right?
Right.
It's the same exact contrasts.
Exactly.
Yeah. This is so good. I could ask you just kind of question after question, but we should probably wrap it up.
Okay.
With the Theotokos there. But when you were talking about her being a warrior, but also someone who is so humble, and it's like, well, really, that's what allows her to defeat the Prince of Pride.
That's right.
Right? It's like humility is her greatest weapon.
That's right. And this is one of the big themes throughout Tolkien's works, is that humility is the ultimate weapon. Like, the whole point of the story is to destroy power, not to grasp for it. It's to destroy it. It's about losing a treasure, which is a weird. Most this is part of what makes this kind of a modern tale rather than a traditional medieval tale where there's about gaining treasure at the end. This is about losing a treasure, and it's over and over again insisted, like, we're not going to win this thing through giving battle. We're not. We just can't. If it's just about who has the most soldiers and best at war, Sauron wins. But it's about taking away the source of that to begin with, and giving it up. And of course, in the ultimate moment when the ring is finally destroyed, Frodo doesn't have it in him to do it. He says, "It's mine. The ring is mine." And he puts it on, and then it takes what Tolkien calls a eucatastrophe, the good catastrophe. For Gollum to bite his finger off, to take the ring. And then I don't like how they did it in the movies, but I understand why they made it him and Frodo struggling to get it, and then he falls over with it. But in the book, of course, Frodo is defeated by Gollum, and Gollum is dancing in ecstasy at finally having his precious back, and then falls over into the crack of doom, and is burned along with the ring. So, but yeah, I mean, that wouldn't, it would be very unsatisfying to see that on a screen, which is why I understand they did what they did. It needed to be struggle up to the last second. But in the book, he's just sort of dancing and then kind of falls off. But that's Iluvatar. I mean, Iluvatar didn't push him, but Iluvatar wove everything together. He has some role to play for good or for ill before the end, as Gandalf says, right? So
the old world, the old word providence.
Yeah, exactly. Or which is usually signaled in The Hobbit by the word luck. Luck is the word that comes up in The Hobbit. So yeah, the great arc, of course, is that powerlessness and self-sacrifice and humility and suffering, these are the ways to defeat the enemy. And not through sheer force of arms. And then when the scriptures talk about the violent taking the kingdom of heaven, the violence that's being done is not violence against other people. It's actually violence against our own dark passions. That's the violence. That's why this line has been traditionally associated with asceticism, not with, overwrought apologetics. It's with asceticism. That's the violence. I mean, there's definitely a place for apologetics. Don't get me wrong. I think good apologetics are very, very valuable. But that we're not struggling against other human beings. We're struggling against our own passions. We're struggling against demons. And what is the story of the Lord of the Rings but a struggle against demons? That's really the big arc there. So it is a deeply Christian story, but not in any way where Tolkien is trying to preach. He's just simply being Christian and writing an amazing, I would say, the book of the 20th century and maybe the 21st as well. We'll see. We're not that far in yet.
Yeah, we'll find out. It's maybe bigger in the 21st century than the 20th century. That's how you know if you've created something of value, if it lasts for a couple of centuries rather than a decade, or in our case with videos, maybe a month. You just threw out the idea, the image of Gollum, who's gained the whole world, right? He's struggled, he's gained the ring, he's dancing, gained the whole world, but then he loses everything in just a moment. I don't know if you've read Dr. Michael Ward's paper on Frodo and like the true climax of Lord of the Rings. I heard him present this paper live at a
I have not. I haven't
conference. It's a great one. And I'll be interested to hear what your feedback is. Oh, well, maybe he's stretching it too far, or maybe not. It's hard to say, but he gave a wonderful paper talking about Frodo being surrounded by golden trees like a ring, and gaining the whole world despite giving everything away. And so it's a beautiful contrast to what we see with Gollum, right? Gaining the whole world, but then loses his soul.
Yeah. I mean, there's
Frodo.
It does say that, I think it says this about Aragorn, not about Frodo, but talking about golden trees, right? Lothlorien. Maybe it is about Frodo. I'd have to go back and look, but
it's the fields, the Collarman fields.
Oh, the Carmallin fields. Yeah. Okay, there's that. But there is this idea that they're all, even though Lothlorien eventually becomes abandoned by the elves, that they walk there. There's a sense in which they're eternally there, in this kind of paradisaical place on earth, which, I mean, connects very well with the deeply Christian idea that every good thing, every good relationship, every good word, every good moment, every beautiful moment, everything that is in accordance with the will of God exists eternally. And that the life of the age to come could be described as everything good in your life. And that's all together, always, with no loss. And that the only thing that'll be lost is that which is burned away because it was not in accordance with the will of God.
Well said, Father. Well, as we conclude today's interview, I want to share a couple books that have blessed my life. One is, I read this years ago, St. Ignatius of Antioch, the God-bearer. And believe it or not, it definitely relates to even our topic today, because he's someone who seemed to promote humility and martyrdom. I would use St. Ignatius of Antioch as an apologetic tool sometimes.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
About the Eucharist and the ecclesiology, the nature of the church. But yet, one unexpected theme in this book is the theology of martyrdom and humility that you talk about in this book.
Yeah. I love St. Ignatius. In some ways, he's one of the reasons I became Orthodox. I read his works and I was like, I want to be in the same church as this guy. The sheer love that he has for Christ
Hmm.
just blasts through the pages of his works. And his thirst for the glory of the resurrection is so powerful. It's funny, like sometimes people read him and he'll say, like when he's talking to the Romans and he says, don't get in the way of my martyrdom. Like, don't intercede for me with the authorities. Like, I want to be martyred, eaten by lions in the Colosseum. I want this, which to a modern person, like, that's weird. What's with that guy? But no. He so much wants to be with Christ, and he's seen this door is opening up in front of him. And so that's why he's just so ready to walk through it. And isn't that just a way of describing the commandment in the scriptures? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, mind. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what he's doing. That's what he's doing. He didn't volunteer for that. He was taken, he was arrested, but when he saw that this was his destiny, he just exploded with love for Christ. And that's, I hope that shines through a little bit in that book. As I look at various themes in his letters, he's one of my favorite writers. And especially if someone is brand new to reading the church fathers, he's one of the easiest to connect with. Absolutely. He's a direct successor to the apostles. He knew the apostles himself personally. And so you're hearing from the very next generation of Christians when you read St. Ignatius of Antioch. So that book is my tribute to him, my kind of summary of a number of the things that I learned from him.
Yes, it's very good. I sometimes call him the missing link. If you are struggling to connect the history of the scriptures with the history of the fathers, for many, he's kind of that missing link. And it's also very difficult to trash his reputation and come up with some kind of novel theory on why he's a bad guy. It's
Right.
like
although I have to tell you, I saw one time, it was a low church Protestant of some kind, someone against bishops. And he said, Ignatius in his letters is trying to, he's trying to solidify his own positions. That's why he talks so much about the importance of the bishop. I'm like, the dude is walking to be martyred.
Right.
What are you talking about?
Yeah. The guy's power hungry. That's where he's getting his theology.
In chains. In chains.
So.
He's about to get eaten by lions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So another good book, even though it doesn't have the title Middle Earth or Tolkien in it, he does show up in this book. Whether you're talking about stars or dragons, he's there.
That's
right.
Right.
It's a fun book.
Yep. I can't help but talk about Tolkien. And I do use the word Middle Earth in there, although Tolkien did not invent that word. That is a word that comes from old Germanic languages. It's Old English, of course, it's in Old Norse, Midgard in Old English, Midgardr in Old Norse. But yeah, I bring him in to help kind of explain some of the cosmology and some other stuff like that. And I just couldn't help myself. What can I say?
That's okay. I was not sad about those examples that you threw out there. Also, if you are a Lord of the Spirits podcast, I'm advocating, I don't know if I said this to Father Stephen, but I'm saying it to you. We need some kind of encyclopedia.
Oh, I mean, probably the closest you get would be the index in the book that you just held up. It does have a good index in the back. Yeah, it's interesting. I get contacted by people all the time who want to do like sort of fan projects for the podcast, like a Lord of Spirits wiki or a Lord of Spirits transcript archive and all kinds of stuff like this. And I mean, these are all great ideas, but it's kind of difficult because like for one thing, we need to, Ancient Faith needs to kind of keep the stewardship of those materials. So we can't let people republish stuff. But on the other hand, you guys are coming up with all kinds of great ideas, and maybe we'll come up with something ourselves, like a dedicated website for the show, where it could have like a glossary, and including maybe some of the in jokes that keep getting repeated throughout the show. I do have an episode guide that I put together, so you can see a list of the series and stuff like that, and it floats around in the Facebook group and some other places like that. But yeah, I mean, it's a good idea because we're about to do our 136th episode tonight. So, we're looking at probably close to 400 hours worth of material. It sounds exhausting when I say that, but
Father Stephen said Lord of the Spirits is for truck drivers and landscapers.
Yeah, that's right. It's funny to me because most episodes are 3 hours long. and some are more. And I hope I can say this without sounding conceited at all, but by God's grace, it seems to be the biggest English language Orthodox podcast that there is. Like, we have between 50 and 60,000 monthly listeners for that show. And I mean, there's new ones coming all the time. Like, every single episode is listened to every single month. And so it makes no sense to me that this long rambly show with a couple of Gen Xers cracking stupid jokes at each other would do this well. But I think that what it just says is that the things that we like to talk about are connecting with people at this moment in the history of our world. And so we're lucky, we're blessed that we hit on it. I mean, when it was proposed back in 2020, the response we initially got from the leadership at Ancient Faith Radio was, this seems kind of niche. Do you think that anyone will listen to it? And my response was not, I didn't say, oh no, this is gonna be a huge hit. No, I said, I don't know, but can we please try? We don't have anything like this. Can we try? And then we just started watching the stats go up and up and up. And it's just, it still doesn't make sense to me. Thank God. It's lovely. And when I go places and give talks that are based on this material, people respond to it really, really well. And so I think we're just at this moment where we need to talk about these things. And it has nothing to do with me and Father Stephen. Really, it doesn't. It has nothing to do with the two of us. We're just loving something, and we want other people to love what we have loved. And so we're trying to teach them the way that we've loved it. So here we are, this podcast about giants and dragons and, whatever weird thing is on Father Stephen's mind has become, thank God, a place where a lot of people have gained a deeper appreciation for the Holy Scriptures, and in many cases that's been their door into the Orthodox Church. And so I'm just so happy to be here when it comes to Lord of Spirits and all the stuff that I get to do. But it's just crazy how well that show has done. So I thank God, and I'm grateful to everybody who listens, and to those who spread the word and read our books and whatever else. So.
Yeah, it's good. I sometimes joke that there's kind of like two readings of Lord of the Spirits. One is it's just about weird stuff. Well, like that would be the wrong reading if it's just about weird stuff. The second reading would be it's about weird stuff in the Bible that all points to Christ, because he's
That's right.
Lord of creation, which is a bit wild, by the way.
It's fundamentally a Bible study.
Yeah.
So not every episode is about angels and demons or whatever, but every episode is about the Bible. And it's about reading the Bible deeply. That's what we're trying to do, is read the Bible deeply and try to read it within cultural, ancient context as much as we possibly can. The humor, which some people are not into. And I would just say, look, I mean, no one's making you listen to this show. Why would you hate listen to a podcast that's this long? But the humor is there for two reasons. I mean, the most obvious reason is it's just who Father Stephen and I are. We are actually friends. It's funny. There's a whole meme out there, not a literal meme like a picture or whatever, but there's a meme out there that Ancient Faith Radio makes Father Stephen work with me, and that the show would be so much better, if only I weren't there. Which, thank you very much. But the truth is that he and I actually are friends, and have been. We were friends for years and years before we ever started the show. And so the humor is just what comes because he and I are talking to each other. There's a whole other set of jokes when we're doing our briefings before we do the episode, because that's just what comes out. But also, I've found, as someone who's a teacher, that especially if you're delivering concepts that people haven't heard before, or maybe sometimes a little bit complicated or very strange, humor gives people a little space, a little moment to digest the weird thing they just heard. It's a little relaxation. And whereas if you keep people just sort of tight, like a lecture the whole time or whatever, then it can be harder to actually absorb all of it. So I mean, there's all kinds of theories about teaching actually that analyze what works with teaching, and humor is often mentioned as a way to help people absorb stuff. So even though we don't say, okay, we got to make sure we do at least 3 jokes per half. No, we're not doing that. It just kind of comes out because it's who we are. It still serves a purpose. And I've noticed that a lot of people get a delight out of out of the humor, and so therefore since they're delighted by the humor, they're also then listening to the Bible study at the same
Right.
time, you know.
I would say it's where like 80%, 90% people, people are, they're wanting like fully human relationships.
Yeah.
And if we're just trying to make it highly edited, clips that are just, and those exist. 5 minutes,
Yeah,
10
I
minutes,
mean,
90 seconds.
there is a whole sort of bootleg channel on YouTube that is dedicated to clips of Father Stephen going on people's live streams and saying spicy stuff. You know, so I mean, I watch that channel sometimes. You know, it's very entertaining. He's a very entertaining guy.
It's all popped up in the last few months.
That's
Spicy
right.
Father Stephen everywhere. It's fun.
That's right.
Well, Father Andrew, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a delight to have you, and prayers for everything you guys are doing at Ancient Faith. I've been blessed by the ministry that's there. I know many people have as well. And again, if there's anything you want to plug, I know there's some new books that have just come out. You want to talk about any new books that have popped up on Ancient Faith?
I mean, there's always something new.
Right.
I can only speak of my own stuff. So like this last October, Deacon Seraphim Roland and I released a co-authored book called The Wolf and the Cross, which is about our pilgrimage in Lithuania and kind of telling the story of Orthodox Christianity in Lithuania. But also another big project that he and I and some other friends have worked on is on the Orthodox Pilgrim YouTube channel right here on YouTube. And we just released the first episode of our new documentary series, which is called The Raven and the Dove. And it is about a pilgrimage we took in Scotland and also in Northern England. And the first episode is about Saint Ninian, who is probably the first saint in Scotland. It's 35 minutes long, so it's not a big commitment, unlike a lot of the work that I do. But please go check it out, subscribe to that channel, and share it with your friends. I'm really proud of that work, not least because there's very little Orthodox material out there like that. And so while we're having an amazing time, thanks be to God, thanks also to some very, very generous donors, amazing time on pilgrimage. You know, not everybody can go on those pilgrimages. Some people I've actually heard have seen stuff we've done in pilgrimage and then went there themselves. That's awesome. Other people say, I'll never be able to go there, but I get to see what it's like because I can watch you guys on pilgrimage. And that makes me very happy. Or, hey, I watched you guys on pilgrimage and I got an icon of that saint because I was so impressed by his story and I wanted to make him part of my life and, or her, and to connect together like that. So please check out the Orthodox Pilgrim YouTube channel and subscribe and share it. There's lots and lots of materials on there already, lots of clips from various things, moments in our pilgrimage. And as we love to say every time, we've got a lot more stories to tell.
That's right. And with that, we'll end our episode today on Barrel Age Faith. Again, Father Andrew, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much, Cassian.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
The theme of the whole Bible is the divine indwelling of the world. That's why the Bible and Orthodox tradition are on exactly the same page. At the center of our faith is the transfiguration of human beings in the whole creation by the divine glory. The incarnation is thus nested in the center of Scripture. Scripture, the prophets talk about God coming in person. He's going to come. He's going to come more fully than he's ever come before. And then he steps into the world as this Galilean Jew, born in Bethlehem and raised in Nazareth. That's the most intimate relation that God can possibly appropriate to the world. And it happens in the person of Jesus. At the beginning of Ephesians, we read of the recapitulation of heaven and earth in the person of Jesus Christ. He unites all things in him. And then near the end of Ephesians, we read about male and female reconciled, harmonized, and put in right order through the work of Jesus Christ and through the imaging of the divine bridegroom in the life of the particular human bridegroom.
The whole New Testament can be called the gospel, since it contains nothing but the gospel teaching. But the novice should first of all study the Lord's commandments in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. And the study of the commandments in these evangelists combined with the actual practice of the commandments, the other scriptures that constitute the New Testament should also be easily understandable. This first episode is going to be free to all of you, and the rest will be for paid subscribers. Seraphim, thank you for preparing this Bible study through Ephesians.
Ephesians is one of Paul's later letters. It's relatively late in his apostolic career, probably somewhere in the early 60s AD. So this is, we might say, Paul's mature thought. And I think Paul, as he is entering into this decade, is aware that he's approaching the end of his apostolic career. This is something that you see in certain of his epistles, that Paul is aware that he's not going to live forever. He's aware that the main portion of his mission is coming to a conclusion, and then he thinks about putting his apostolic witness to writing as a kind of a perpetual testament and witness to his ministry. Zechariah 2 are the same as the words that are used in Ephesians chapter 3. This is Zechariah's vision of the cosmic sanctuary of the Messianic age, where God comes down and he dwells with man, and he builds the city of God into his own dwelling place. And you can maybe start to see, if you're familiar with Ephesians, how this is emerging in Paul's mind in his elaboration of his vision of the church. Zechariah 3 and 6 actually explicitly tell us that these visions are prophetic of the Messianic age. It says, "Behold, this is the one who is a sign of my servant, the branch." The branch is the Messiah, as you see in Jeremiah 23, where it's the branch of David, who's a king who's going to reign forever with justice and righteousness. And actually, the branch in Zechariah is signified by the high priest, whose name is Joshua or Jesus. This is one of those texts where Jesus is kind of bursting out of the page and begging the reader to recognize him.